the search for truth. I shan't introduce everybody. I think you've met everybody already, but just to name them: Michael Levitt, Frank Wilczek, Peter Doherty, Shirin Ebadi, Stephen Chu, David Gross, and Joseph Stiglitz. We've called it the search for truth because, in a way, in their own disciplines, that is what unites them, their search for truth. But something else that unites them as Nobel laureates is the creativity they employ in that search. And so I'd like to begin by discussing that creativity. And let's start by trying to work out what we mean by the term creativity. I'm looking for some enthusiasm for that question in their eyes. Oh, I've got some. Good. Michael.
So, creativity is really interesting, but if you ask anyone who's creative where it comes from, they don't usually know. I haven't met anybody who gets up in the morning and writes down a list saying things to be creative about, and then item 1, no, I did that, item 2. It seems to come from walking the dog, taking showers, watching TV, and doing something which is actually non-scientific. So I think creativity is a mysterious thing. It's also clear that there are people who are serial creative people, but I think it's very difficult to know what really makes it. I think there's a certain level of messiness that makes you creative.
David.
Well, unfortunately, I think all of us will agree we have no idea where creativity comes from. And that's quite unfortunate, because if we knew, we could teach it. And we can't, or at least we know ways of encouraging it, but not teaching it. But I think it's clearly related to our illusion that the conscious I is somehow in control of even our thoughts. So I often have the experience of, in situations like this, being asked provocative questions like you just asked, and then saying something, not on this occasion, because I've said it before, I'm saying something that is novel and new and creative and surprises me, and I said, my God, that's interesting, I've never heard that before. So it comes from some other place that is not conscious, I have no doubt. And the brain consists of many parts we understand now, neuroscience, different modules. Creativity is located somewhere there and is a surprise often to the conscious self. So I have no idea what it is. There are ways, however, of fostering it.
Just to follow up, what conditions do you find yourself most creative in? Is there something you can point to?
I think what definitely motivates creativity is concentration. Just come up with no idea, a new way of looking at things. But how it happens, I have no idea. But concentration is crucial.
Enthusiasm is growing. Frank, then Joe. Frank first.
Well, first, my personal experience. My best work, I think, has come from immersing myself in some subject, some problem, and then getting annoyed, realizing something could be better, something where there have been unexplored possibilities. But I also resonate with what David said. It's a very similar question a couple of days ago in a similar venue. It's something along those lines, a little different. That our brain indeed consists of is a community, different pieces that have different skills, different languages. And some of them are logical, some of them are pattern recognition. You might say aesthetic, because they want patterns to click and make sense. And I think at least one important ingredient of creativity is to get all these guys communicating and pulling in the same direction. And so that's the process of, people call it intuition. You see a pattern, you kind of identify a goal, but you don't know how to get there logically, and then you reconstruct some path. It doesn't always work, doesn't always exist, but when it exists, that's an important creative process.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, I want to just add one dimension, which is a questioning of what you were taught. before, or the standard model. So it begins with discounting, skepticism of, and I also think it begins, as I said, not with a question of wanting to answer something that is wrong with what is the standard wisdom. And then finally, one other ingredient is this being exposed to ideas that are very different, and the process of how those ideas meet the problem and skepticism is a very mystical one, but you have to be exposed to these other sources of ideas so that this creative melting pot occurs.
How could anyone possibly think that? Is often a very provocative kind of way of getting yourself moving.
I want to get everybody's views on this one. So Steve first, and then Shirin. Steve?
Well, for me, it's a few things. A rebellious streak, not willing to accept things as you hear them. But also, when I go into a new field, that's where I think I get the most excited. Unencumbered with knowledge, and this is a very good thing. But I would also link with people who are experts in the field, who are willing to put up with questions like, what about this? And, they would have to patiently explain to me, no, that's not right, or yes, but someone else has thought about that. And maybe in 1 or 2% of the times they will say, let's think some more. And so to have those collaborators be willing to put up with you and teach you, and it includes my students and postdocs, that is actually, for me, the most exciting time, and that's why, I lurch around.
معنای خلاقیت در رشته‌های علوم که اینجا لوریت ها صحبت کردن با رشته من که حقوق تفاوت میکنه.
Now the meaning of creativity differs from sphere to sphere. So it's how I see creativity is different from the definitions given by my esteemed scientist colleagues.
من همواره به دنبال عدالت بودم و سعی می‌کردم که قوانینی برای برقراری عدالت اجتماعی بنویسم.
I have always been in pursuit of justice. To that end, I have always tried to come up with ideas for legislation towards implementation of social justice.
و من خلاقیتم رو و افکار جدیدی که به مغزم میاد فقط در اثر این است که با خود سوژه برخورد بکنم، یعنی لمس بکنم و ببینم بی‌عدالتی یعنی چه.
I become creative when I actually immerse myself in an idea and to see how, for example, can fight injustice.
و به همین دلیله که من یکی از کارهایی که همیشه میکنم این است که با هوملس ها و یا افرادی بی خانمان ها دائما در ارتباطم.
So one of the things I do to that end is to constantly try and be in touch with homeless or displaced people.
و از اونها خیلی چیزا یاد میگیرم.
And I learned so much from them.
برای اینکه هیچ کس ظلم رو مثل مظلوم نمیتونه بیان کنه.
Because no one can actually speak about oppression as somebody who's been oppressed.
و وقتی که شما یه چیزی رو درک کردید اون وقت راه حل هم فکر کنید با تجربه و تخصصی که دارید پیدا میکنید.
So the key is first to understand a problem and then draw on your own experiences and skills in a bit to find solutions to that problem.
اما میخوام یه چیزی بگم و اون است که خلاقیت ما بدون اراده سیاسی به درد نمیخوره.
But one thing I need to stress is that our creativity is of no use without political resolve.
یعنی بهترین افکارها و بهترین قوانین برای برقراری عدالت زمانی میتواند مفید باشد
Legislation can only be effective towards establishment of justice if there is a democratic government to implement those opinions and ideas.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And again, it brings out the ideas of concentration and exposure to other influences, which is so important and has been brought out by others. Peter, you haven't spoken on this one yet.
Creativity in science, I think most of it's been said, often happens, discovery, insight, novelty, often happens when you come into a field from outside. So you're not trapped by the perceptions of the field, which can be stultifying. I mean, I think we all know scientists who are actually terrified of discovering anything because it would put them outside the norm and they'd feel very uncomfortable by it. You can't be that sort of personality. Creativity can come, Francis Crick and Jim Watson, two very different personalities, different backgrounds, talked and talked and talked, backwards and forwards, annoyed everybody else, dragged stuff out from this person and that person, stole everything and made a synthesis. Very creative. Crick, after he and Watson split up, did the same thing with Sidney Brenner. You got 3 Nobel Prize winners there. So creativity is right across society in all sorts of different ways and all sorts of different people. I think the creative person can often be an extremely annoying person. They're annoying to be around. They see things differently from the way that everybody else sees them. Makes them very discomforting. They're not particularly like the social outcasts at times. Creativity can be a bit of a burden and a bit of a bore.
Yeah, the curse of creativity. Yes. You've mentioned the immersion, concentration. How important in your own lives has creativity been as opposed to just good hard work? That's one for the graduate students to listen to, right? Who wants to take that? Peter?
Well, a lot of breakthroughs in biomedical science actually come from better technology. And we have to thank the physicists often for that, and chemists and all the rest of it, because you're worrying about a problem, you're seeing a problem, and you're not seeing it because you don't see clearly enough. So it's often, as the biblical saying, through a glass darkly we see in part, and then you see better. And when you see better, you understand better and you measure better, because science is about measurement. And if we're talking about truth, that these are universals. We're talking about the future of truth today. Well, basically the truth for science hasn't changed at all in 400 years. I mean, basically the mechanisms are the same, the rules are the same, the product is the same. So that is the future of science. It's the future of truth in the broader context that we're concerned about. So,
I actually try to avoid hard work when things look complicated and difficult. That's often a sign that there's a different way, a better way to do it.
Steve talked about one of them, which is going into a new field, or posing a new question, which is not necessarily yet a discovery, but just approaching a new question that most people ignore because they think it's too hard or because it is too hard. So empty territory is a great place for creativity. It's very easy to come up with the first good ideas in the field. And once breakthroughs are then made, the easy ones, the crowd rushes in and it gets harder and harder. Science has also, over 400 years, developed enormously. We now have millions of scientists. Mm-hmm. There used to be hundreds. So one lesson I try to tell my students, give them hints as to how to be successful as a creative, productive scientist, is to go where the crowds aren't yet.
Steve, sorry, Mark.
Okay, so just very quickly, what Peter said, my whole career I've been trying to develop instruments, invent new instruments. and because I realized there's so many more people smarter than me, but if you are the first to look under a rock with a new instrument, you don't have to be smart, and so continuing just okay, what new instrument or what new method or what new technique or what new nanoprobe. And so I try to teach people who are equally incompetent and dumb that invent a new instrument, invent a new method, and then the world opens up.
Michael, you're not today.
So I guess, like Frank, most of my work has been theoretical. And just thinking back, as I have over the last couple of minutes, I think most of the time you're just working hard. But I would guess I probably had, 5 or 6 good ideas in my life. So firstly, it's an amazing feeling. It's a high that is really incredible when you get it. Sometimes they don't work out. Maybe I've had 10 ideas and half of them didn't work out. But I think in some ways, it's one of the reasons why being a scientist is so great, to have an idea, to feel it's going to be okay, and then slowly work it out and it comes out to be okay. So I think in some ways, creative ideas are the very heart about the best part about science.
Thank you. Joe?
Well, I'm an economist, and some of the people here would doubt the use of the word science. I agree very strongly that concentration is important. And in some sense, some kind of hard work, but sometimes people who work very hard don't, because they're looking in the wrong place. And this is where I think economics is different from the other subjects, which is it's not usually a new instrument or a new data set. So if you take, say, a problem like inequality, it was obviously sitting there. It was that the ideology was so strong that nobody wanted to talk about it, or the question of the existence of imperfect information. That was a question where they didn't know how to think about this mathematically and were afraid to go there. So in both of those cases, it was not a new discovery. The facts were obvious, but it was really the willingness or saying this is probably important, and you ought to concentrate your mind to figure out whether it is or not and how it affects our discipline.